When it comes to dry aged steaks, there's usually only a few cuts that you'll see with that dry aged attribute. And it'll be your main ones, your ribeyes, your New Yorks, porterhouses, and whatnot. There's a plethora of other kind of thin meat cuts that you don't typically see dry aged. One of them would be the hanger steak. So we decided, let's run the experiment. Let's see what dry aging a hanger steak actually does. So if we're looking at the three steaks I have right here, these are all hanger steaks. This is an unaged hanger. This piece right here was dry aged in one of our test coolers. So it's essentially separated from the rest of our facility. I kind of have a different set of controls in this cooler than I do in our main coolers where this one was dry aged. So visually, you can see very different between these two dry aged hangers. They were both aged for the exact same time period at the exact same temperature. And honestly, in the same building, just in two separate coolers. So right off the bat, environment is probably the biggest control, if you will, in how your dry aging process plays out. One of the reasons you don't typically see the hanger dry age is because dry aging is a very destructive process. All of the exterior you need to trim off. Obviously, that increases your cost. Why do we do it? Because of the development of flavor and the increase in tenderness. So the dry aging process really moves your end product into a whole different realm. But yes, there is a lot of waste to it. When you're dealing with a cut like the hanger, there's very little protective covering on this steak. What I mean by that is there's no bone anywhere kind of surrounding this muscle. You've got a little bit of fat and some silver skin, but part of the dry aging process is trimming the exterior. And so in this scenario, you're gonna have to trim basically 360 all the way around this. And so it's gonna shoot your trim loss up. In addition to the trim loss that you get during the dry aging process, you also have moisture loss. So there's actually two loss points with dry aging. This piece right here that we dry aged in the test box has a totally different environment. There's a lower relative humidity in this cooler, and that causes moisture to evaporate from the muscle at a faster rate. So by weight, we lost about 20% in just moisture loss on this hanger. This piece, this was aged in our typical coolers, we only lost 12% moisture loss on this. So significantly less amount of loss on the moisture side as a result of the different humidity levels in the rooms. So different weight losses based on the humidity of the two. Now let's check the trim loss. So we'll go ahead and fabricate these two dry aged hangers and see how much loss we have. So for the hanger that was aged in our test box, we're right about 2 pounds before we start trimming. Typically, when we trim hangers, I like to kind of find that connective tissue and pull them apart. On this, it's so dried out that I'm gonna kind of do an exterior trim before I separate the two muscles. Something that's interesting to note about dry aged beef and the trimming aspect of it is it sounds gnarly and a lot of people don't like to hear it. But assuming that the process was done safely and correctly, the reason you trim dry aged beef is for quality. This exterior here, it looks gnarly. If I wanted to keep it on, I could. It's like a beef jerky at this point, right? There's too much flavor change to make it enjoyable. So with the exterior of the dry aged hanger kind of trimmed, this is just really cool. You can see this connective tissue running right through the steak right there. It really kind of pops in this dry aged piece right here. You absolutely want to remove that piece from the hanger before you cook it. This is not a steak that I would want to then cut up like that. The connective tissue, it's going to have serious chew. So that's got to come out. So that's one of the dry aged hangers trimmed down. So if we started around 2 pounds and now we are at a little over 1 pound. So it's almost a 50% trim loss on this because you had to take so much of the exterior off. Again, if you did not dry age the hanger, you would still want to remove the silver skin and some of the fat, but you wouldn't have nearly as much exterior trimming. And that's in addition to the moisture loss. Okay, now let's go ahead and fabricate the second dry aged hanger. This one was dry aged in our typical facility. So right off the bat, you can see it's got a lot more fuzz to it. Our coolers have a higher relative humidity than my test cooler, and also compared to a lot of other dry aging establishments out there, that's why we get this much of this fuzzy microbial growth. We love it because of the flavor it develops. Right off the bat, what's interesting with this is I can tell immediately, you can feel that it lost a little less moisture than the other dry aged hanger. It's not as dry of a final product. And realistically, the amount of moisture lost during the process, that's going to play a part in the final flavor of the product. So after trimming down the steak that we dry aged in our typical aging coolers, started at 3 pounds. We're a little under 2 pounds right now. Comparing that to the prior one, this hanger started a little bit larger. Your trim loss was actually the exact same on both of these, right? So I lost more weight, but by volume, it was a 42% trim loss between, hanger A and hanger B. So kind of interesting. From my perspective, I thought we would get more loss on this one because it had a drier surface to it. But in this experiment, you're going to lose more with a lower relative humidity during the moisture loss part of the dry aging process. When it comes to trimming them down, you're kind of screwed either way. You just lose so much during the trimming of a dry aged hanger steak. So now let's go ahead and we'll just trim an unaged hanger steak just to get a baseline on that. Well, actually different from the other two hangers, the first thing I'm going to do is not do any trimming on the exterior. The first thing I'm going to do is split them, and then we'll trim as needed. So you can see much smaller trim pile. This guy started a little over 2 pounds. Now we're down to 1.7. So 25% trim loss on an unaged hanger. So you do have trim on a hanger, but when you dry age, your trim almost doubles. Now that we've trimmed down all of the hangers, the 2 dry aged and the 1 unaged, it's actually really cool. This hanger came from our test box. I call it a test box. What I really mean by that is it's more of a sterile environment. So it's a relatively new aging cooler we put together, and I have kind of purposely not put any of our usual product into that cooler. I'm kind of trying to keep it sterile, so it's like a test box, if you will. If you compare the finished product, the hanger in our test box versus our standard, we talked about how you had more moisture loss, and you can see it in the finished product. It's kind of subtle, but you can just kind of tell tactilely and visually that you lost more moisture in this hanger than you did in that one. Then if we compare those ones to the unaged hanger, now it's like night and day, just kind of the feel of the steak, not having lost any moisture due to aging compared to this one. This has almost got like more of like a Play-Doh feel to it than this. This is just a typical wet aged steak. Then the next question is really going to be, what's the taste difference? So we'll cook these up and see what we think. We've got our hangers all cooked up. We've got the 2 dry aged hangers and then an unaged hanger just as a baseline. So it'll be interesting to see what comes through in the flavor, especially because a hanger steak is one of my favorite cuts, probably hands down. I would say that I eat hanger steak more than any other cut. It's just like, it's an amazing, versatile cut. So let's see what adding a complexity of dry aging does to the flavor. So we'll go ahead and cut a few slices off of each. and see what we got. Super tender, which is just an inherent quality of hanger steak. Okay, so let's start with the unaged hanger steak. Just a damn good steak. This is the hanger steak that we had dry aged in our test box. And now we'll do the one from our typical coolers. Tenderness wise, they're all freaking amazing. Again, that's just like one of the inherent qualities of a hanger steak. It is so freaking tender. Like I really honestly believe you have to work hard to screw up a hanger steak. You can even overcook it and it's amazing. What's kind of interesting to note, even before going into the flavor, is the smell difference between all three. Even though these two are dry aged, each one of them has almost like a unique nose to it, if you will. So the unaged is just kind of like, it smells like a steak. It's amazing. This one from our test box, it's got a little bit of a harsher smell to it when you kind of go comparing it to the one from our typical coolers. And I think that has a lot to do with the environment that we have in our dry aging coolers. We kind of keep the parameters set to really allow a very particular species of mold to do well in those dry aging coolers. And that mold imparts a more subtle, kind of nutty undertone to the dry aged product. So even just from smelling, you can pick that up. Then when you start looking at the taste, it comes through in that as well. So this guy from our boxes, I love it. It's amazing. It kind of brings like a little bit more complexity to the steak itself. The hanger is located within the rib cage of the animal. So sometimes a low quality hanger will pick up kind of livery notes to it. You don't get that in these ones at all. And the dry aging, again, kind of like softens it and almost brings just like a depth of flavor that you don't get in the unaged hanger. Like very, very different flavor profiles. And then if we compare it again to this one from the test box, so this aging environment had very little microbial growth. So the flavor is going to be developed by the evaporation of the moisture, not as much by the enhancement of any flavors coming through from mold. So is the experiment worth it? Ultimately for me, I love doing this kind of stuff, so I would say yes, totally worth it. I honestly am always surprised at how much I enjoy the dry aged version of steaks. Even going into this, I kind of assumed I would just stick with the unaged hanger because again, that's one of my favorite cuts. But the flavor profile in the dry aged one, especially the one aged in our standard coolers, is really, really unique. And it's a really kind of fun thing to try, especially if you like hangers. A dry aged hanger is just, it tweaks it some way. That's really kind of fun.